You know that feeling when you finally splurge on a pair of cheap bookshelf speakers, only to discover 3 weeks later that the highs sound tinny and the bass never really shows up. I've been there, and it's why I always pause before clicking Add to Cart on any budget-oriented audio gear. The regret comes fast, and the money is already gone. That's why today, I'm looking at a bundle that promises to skip the disappointment stage altogether. The Klipsch Reference Premier RP600 bookshelf speakers paired with the RP504 center channel. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first question most of us ask is simple: will these speakers actually fill a typical living room or home theater setup without needing a mountain of extra equipment? I spent a weekend wiring them into a mid-size media console, using a decent AVR that already had a couple of HDMI inputs, and I paid attention to how they behaved from the moment the power button clicked. My goal was to see if the hype around Klipsch's exceptional audio quality for a bookshelf speaker translates into a day-to-day listening experience, not just a lab-grade demo. Let's start with the physical side of the deal. The RP600 carries that classic Klipsch aesthetic black walnut-stained wood veneer, a sleek front grille, and a fairly compact footprint that slides easily onto a shelf or stands on a dedicated speaker stand. The RP504 center channel matches the look, which is a nice touch for a cohesive front stage appearance. Both units use Klipsch's Tractrix ports, a design intended to smooth out the airflow and reduce turbulence, which in theory should give tighter, more controlled bass. In practice, I noticed the low end stayed present even when I turned the volume up for a movie action scene, without the obnoxious booming that cheap ported speakers can produce. Now, the tweeter design is what really sets these apart from the average bookshelf model. Klipsch uses a vented, horn-loaded tweeter that aims to extend the high-frequency response while keeping the dispersion wide enough to cover a typical listening triangle. In a real-world test, the dialogue in a film was clear and articulate, even when I was sitting a bit off-axis from the center channel. This is a big win for anyone who wants a home theater setup that doesn't force everyone into a single sweet spot. But the real question is how they behave when you throw in a mix of content streaming music, games, sports, and the occasional surround sound movie marathon. On a Spotify playlist of acoustic folk and jazz, the RP600 delivered a surprisingly natural mid-range. Instruments sat nicely in the soundstage, and the piano sustain didn't feel overly bright, a common complaint with some bright-tuned speakers. When I switched to a high-octane rock track, the drivers handled the punchy drums without any distortion, and the brass sections stayed crisp without sounding harsh. The center channel, the RP504 held its own on dialogue-heavy content, keeping the voices anchored to the screen while letting the ambient soundtrack fill the room. One of the hidden trade-offs I discovered is the need for a fairly robust amp. The RP600 has a sensitivity of around 96 dB, which is high for a bookshelf speaker, meaning they can get loud with relatively low power. However, they also have a lower impedance of 8 ohms, and the vented tweeter can be a little demanding on the AMP's control. When I used a modest 50 watt per channel AVR, the speakers performed well at moderate volumes, but began to lose some of that tightness when I cranked the volume past 80% for an intense action film. A more powerful amp, something in the 100 watt per channel range, kept the dynamics tighter and the bass more defined. So, if your receiver is on the lower end, you might not extract the full potential of this bundle. Another practical consideration is placement flexibility. Because these are bookshelf speakers, you have the option of wall mounting them, standing them on stands, or even placing them on a shelf. I tried a wall-mounted configuration, and the Tractrix ports performed well as long as there was at least a few inches of clearance behind them. Too close to the wall introduced a slight boominess in the low end. The center channel, being a bit larger, needed a solid piece of furniture, or a dedicated TV stand to sit on without rattling. The good news is that the overall footprint isn't overwhelming, so you can fit them into apartments or smaller media rooms without sacrificing the aesthetic. Who should consider this bundle? If you're a movie enthusiast who wants a solid front-stage foundation without breaking the bank on floor-standing giants, this is a compelling option. The combination of a horn-loaded tweeter and the Tractrix Port gives you a balanced soundstage that works for dialogue-heavy films and immersive music alike. It also makes sense for gamers who need clear positional cues and crisp highs for explosions and footsteps. On the other side, if you're an audiophile hunting for ultra-refined, laboratory-grade accuracy, you might find the horn-loaded tweeter a bit too forward-facing, and you may prefer a more neutral, ribbon tweeter design. Similarly, if you already own a high-end AVR that can drive more demanding speakers, you could get